As we reach a turning point in the pandemic, the conversation around violence in America is coming full circle. A wave of deadly police encounters just last year brought historic uprisings worldwide. This year, a series of mass shootings and an uptick in community violence is further exposing a troublesome trend of violence as a public health crisis in America. My name is Brittani Graves, and I'm with Hush Harbor.
And my name is Michael McBride. I am with the Live for USA Mask for the People campaign. And our theme with Hindsight 2020 is allowing us to examine the ongoing problem of police and community violence, as well as shed light on grassroots efforts to reimagine policing and public safety at both the systemic and the community level.
What you are about to hear is a discussion from Live Free's Bring the Heat Town Hall, which was launched virtually at the height of the George Floyd protests. In this discussion, we will reimagine public safety in a way that reflects the will of the people and has the power to bring an end to the epidemic of needless violence.
As with the last episodes, we'll look at where this conversation stands then, and we'll take a look at where it stands now, and continue to highlight ways for all of us to keep the momentum moving forward.
With lives literally at stake, now is the time for us to go the distance on our mission to put the people first when it comes to public safety and amplify the efforts of reputable organizations and activists on the front lines every day actually doing the work. This movement wasn't built overnight, but it's up to us to keep it in motion.
So today's conversation kicks off with the powerhouse duo, our dear comrades, Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour, co-founders of Until Freedom. We'll pick up afterward with a bit of commentary on where we stand today and how we all can play an important part on the path to policing and public safety that is reimagined.
We know Tamika is on her way to join. Linda, maybe just start us off. You've been at the intersection in New York City, showing up for Black lives as a Palestinian freedom fighter that's living at the intersection of that work, fighting for police violence, fighting against all kind of manners of injustice. Linda, just kind of give us your take of how are you seeing this moment right now where we are?
First of all, thank you, Pastor Mike and Ben, and for all the work that you both do. I'm just blessed and honored to be here. This is the moment I've been waiting for. I've been organizing for almost 20 years now, and I dreamed of these days. I dreamed of the uprisings. I dreamed of the generation that was going to say enough is enough and we're going to meet at this time. And that's what it feels like on the ground. No respectability politics, no negotiations, no give and take. This is about what we and our communities have deserved all along. And now we're not taking anything less. And so for me, I know there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of, folks there are going to be folks who are going to lose their lives, and there are going to be folks who are going to be martyrs for our movement, whether that means George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks, and Eric Garner, and Trayvon Martin, and the many, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the many, many that we can name here for the next, months. Or it might be some of us. And I think that we're a part of a generation that's like, we're ready to go. We're going to do whatever it takes to get freedom and justice for our people. So I know that it's overwhelming, but I want people to know, as organizers and people who've been on the streets for a long time, this is what we've been working up to. This is the moment that we were all waiting for. And so I don't want anyone to think that this came out of nowhere or it came out of left field. This is a culmination of righteous anger, of strategy, and finally getting to the point where we moved on from a different generation that kind of was like, let's get into access to power and figure out how that works and get on the inside. And I think the young folks on the streets are like, we don't need to be on the inside because we're powerful outside, and people power will not be defeated. And so that's where we are. And I'm honored to be here. And I was with you in the beginning, Ben, when you shared that video from Rayshard. It was a video that was recorded 4 months earlier before his brutal murder by the Atlanta Police Department. And believe it or not, this is how overwhelming the world is. Tamika and myself and our other co-founders and friends were actually in Atlanta for another case of another young Black man who was murdered at the hands of racists named Kendrick Johnson. And he, of course, his case has went on the radar. And this is also a moment to start pulling up old cases and saying, if you're all paying attention now, well, you got to pay attention to all of it. And I cannot believe that you're in Atlanta, that we are in Atlanta, to support the family of Kendrick Johnson. And just a few miles away, I'm talking about 9 minutes away from the place that we were staying is where Rayshard Brooks got shot in Atlanta. So we are in Atlanta when this happened. And so I just want people to know that this violence is so close to us, and it's going to continue to be consistent, and that we have to also be as consistent and as powerful, and be ready to not pivot from one family to the next, but understand that this is part of one large systemic continuation of violence against Black people. And so I just want to say I'm honored to be here with all of you. I'm honored to follow the leadership of Tamika Mallory, one of the co-founders of Until Freedom. And as you know, one of the co-chairs of the Women's March. I mean, wherever we go, you know how we do. We do things big. We are strategic organizers. We don't just run in the streets. We know the targets. We know the pressure points. And we're honored to work with you. And I see my beautiful sister. Look at her with her beautiful glowing face.
Yeah. Look at that. Look at the great Tamika Mallory slide on in the room. Unmute yourself and give us a hello. And I know you've been moving all day long, so thanks for taking a quick stop.
Doing. It's good to see y'all. Look, Linda's one of the Black people. She's one of ours. We adopted her. She belongs. Right. But I do want to just share my sister Linda's comments. And when Linda says that she follows my leadership, we follow one another. We follow you, Pastor Mike. We follow you, Ben. We're following so many people. Desmond Meade called me this morning at like 6 o'clock and was running everything that he needed me to do. And I was like, yes, okay. I'm on it. I got it all. I'm going, and that's what we do. We're following one another. And this whole idea that this movement is leaderless is such bullcrap, because we are so full. There's so many people, voices, the Erica Fords that are now, Erica and what it is that she does is now so much more important, because as we see police departments, like I said, things happening around here, but as we see police departments deciding that they're going to protest against accountability, and that they don't want to, that they in this moment don't want to show up for work and protect the people that they're paid to work for. As they decide to do that, what becomes more important is how we govern and provide safety for ourselves. And we know that it can work. So when we're talking about defunding the police, we're not saying our communities won't be safe. We're saying that we've reimagined what public safety looks like. And we know of models across this country that can actually work on the ground. Because guess what? No one knows better than Pookie and his mama what's going down in our communities. And if we make sure he has a job, that his mother has her medication, that their families have food, that in itself will decrease the amount of violence that we see happening in our communities. And so I'm also happy to be a part of this moment, because the work that we've been doing, the hustling, the grinding, and we've been trying to get people to listen to us about balance in between law enforcement and community groups and formerly incarcerated people who know how to address issues in our community. We've been trying to get that out there. And now everyone's like, what do we do? Where do we go? Us. We got the answers. Right. It's like, we got the answers, Sway, on this one, right? It's like, we got to start from, and it's not like we have to start from scratch. And to your point, I mean, I do think some of our challenge in this moment is that most Black people, most folks who do live in these conditions, Latino, brown folks, our Muslim loved ones, all of us who find ourselves under the boot of the empire, we have not been given the right opportunity, resources, or trust from the systems to actually do this kind of self-governance and safety work without needing the kind of violent apparatus kind of, imposing itself in our communities. And so that's why I think when we talk about defunding the police, we are talking about not getting rid of public safety per se. We're saying, give us the money, give us the resources to do this through the vision and the expertise that we have. Talk a little bit about how, as you've traveled across the country, because you both were in Minnesota or Minneapolis, you were in Louisville, you mentioned you're already in Atlanta. What is the feeling on the ground? Do you feel like people are starting to get
this whole sense that, man, we actually can do something much bigger and much better and much, I was going to say badder, but, I don't want to be too, too colloquial, right? So what would you say? What's happening on the ground? What's the sentiment there?
So the mood on the ground, first of all, young people, they're not playing. They're just not having it. They're not about to do the kumbaya thing. You're not going to hush them away. There's not going to be a meeting of the elders that makes the young people with respectability politics go inside. These kids are not with it. They are the generation that's grown up watching death in the palm of their hand. They don't got to go down to the public square to see someone hanging from the tree. They wake up, turn on the cell phone, just pop Instagram on, and there someone is being shot to death right there in front of their faces. And I think when you talk about us going from Louisville, Kentucky to, first of all, we were in New York City. Like, let's not, everybody like to talk about the South and the West and all these other places. Right here in New York City, we were just fighting the mayor and the police commissioner because they were beating the hell out of Black people over not wearing a mask properly and not properly socially distancing. And the police weren't wearing masks themselves. And the straw that broke the camel's back here was when they arrested that woman on the train with her son. They detained her because she didn't have her mask up on her face. And in front of her her little child, her baby had to watch his mother being thrown to the ground by several police officers. So we said no. So we were here in our own town fighting. And of course, because of the energy on the ground, we were able to push the mayor to say no more will we look at social distancing as an enforcement issue, but rather a public safety issue. Again, visionary, because when we, Pastor Mike and Erica and others were talking before about, as we just said, community strategies to dealing with public safety and violence is a public safety issue. They said we were crazy. They said we were just trying to get money, hustling. But actually, it was visionary because now the mayor says, hey, this is a public safety issue. We're going to take money and invest it into these organizations that can go out and make people feel like they're wearing their mask out of love, not because someone is trying to force it on them as a part of policing. So that happened. Then we went to Louisville, where Breonna Taylor is a crisis. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm wearing my Breonna Taylor t-shirt right now. I'm wearing it every day, all day. I'm wearing it anywhere that I go. Breonna Taylor is a very serious situation that we as an activist community and our brothers particularly cannot allow to slip to the wayside. We have got to deal with Breonna Taylor being killed in her home. She did everything right, y'all. She did everything right. She was an EMT worker, wasn't out there dealing drugs. She wasn't, as they like to say, on the stripper pole, although I have some great friends that are, so we're not judging, but I'm just saying they couldn't come up with the rap sheet of things to say about Breonna Taylor. Even her boyfriend, Kenny Walker, who fired the warning shot, was within the law. He had a licensed weapon, and the law in Kentucky says that he had the right to fire that one shot. So again, they couldn't find anything here. And they still killed in her home. So that flies in the face of your theory that if I stay out of trouble and I live in the right zip code and I do all the right things, that I can avoid trouble with the law. Not true. True. And in between that, we're dealing with Ahmaud Arbery, who people saw being murdered on camera. And we find out that this brother's hand was blown, a hole was blown in his hand, his face was hit, his stomach. I mean, come on. Now we leave from there, and folks don't even know that we were in Indianapolis when we learned about what happened to George Floyd, because they killed 3 people in 24 hours.
That's right.
And one woman who was pregnant that the police officer ran over and killed her and her baby. And of course, we went there to stand with the family of Mikel Rose. We left there, we drove 10 hours to go to Minneapolis. So I'm going to be honest with you. By the time y'all see me speaking in Minneapolis, I'm ready to burn things down myself. Because at this point, we're tired and we angry. We fed up.
That's right.
It's too much. So imagine people who are living in these communities. We're privileged. Those of us
every day.
Here, we're privileged. Right. We've found a way to work through these things. We have resources. We get to meet and be in family with one another. But if you're Ray Ray and you're Keisha and you're sitting in the middle of this all the time and you're also watching it in the palm of your hand, this was a moment people just said, enough is enough. And so I think that's where we are.
And then, in fact, it was all of us and the people on the ground that shifted the media from the rioters and the looters to the actual people who were the protesters. The media camera follows the two guys that walk into a liquor store, walk into the Target, but then ignore the hundreds of people who were standing up unarmed against a militarized force in Minneapolis. And when people have to understand that there were many buildings that burned that day when we were there. I remember that AutoZone, the first day when we were there, we were ducking behind the AutoZone. The next day we show up, there is no AutoZone. It's burnt to the ground. It's literally dust on the floor. And I want people, this moment is a moment to challenge ourselves and to think about, stop the judgment, stop asking us why the kids burn in the buildings, why the rioting, why all of that, and start going back to focus on the original sins, which are the killing of unarmed Black people in our community. I don't give a shit about AutoZone. I don't give a damn about Target. I do not care about property. I care about sanctity of life. And that is the issue with people who are armchair folks watching the news and starting to chastise the little young people. And as Tamika said earlier, they're not going to take the calls from the uncles. They're not going to take the calls from the aunties. They're telling the aunties, we've press conferenced to death. We've rallied to death. We've done everything you told us to do. We made the calls to the city council members. We did everything we prayed and we did all of that. And our people are still dying. And Tamika told you in a matter of 3 days, we went from Louisville to Indianapolis to Minneapolis. We come back to New York. And the world is burning down around us. We go to Atlanta for one brother, we end up another brother is murdered. So the equipment is very important. And it's also part of the larger conversation around defunding police. Stop telling me that defunding police, that doesn't make people feel comfortable. Maybe there's another thing that you can say. Maybe we are tired of having to conform our language to make people feel comfortable. We're talking about people dying, people losing their fathers and their brothers and their loved ones. If language is what you're focusing on, then you are part of the problem. I am not going to sit and hire multi-million-dollar PR agencies to tell me how to talk to white people. I'm just not going to do that anymore. It's a waste of our time and a waste of resources. Defunding the police is a very simple concept. And one of the things that I always love that Reverend Barber says, he says budgets are moral documents. And here's what I challenge people to do. If you live in a town or if you live in a city, I challenge you to open up your city budget and look where that funding is going. What it tells me when I look at a city budget, when I look at a town budget, it tells me the morals and values and principles of that community. So if, for example, in New York City, I am ashamed as a New Yorker that my police department gets $6 billion annually. The police department in New York has more funding than the Department of Education, Department of Transportation, Department of Parks and Recreation, Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. I mean, imagine all of that, all the services that we need to make sure that our communities thrive, not just survive, combined still have less money than the New York Police Department. And so this idea of defunding police is exactly what it says. Defund the police department. Take money away from police departments and put it back where it belongs. We complain about crime and people are like, what happens to the, crime happens, car burglaries, things happen in our community. As Tamika said, if our young men and women in our community have living wages, they have economic opportunities, they have access to healthcare and are not in medical debt, they have access to true affordable housing. We are giving them opportunities to thrive. Their schools are not based on tax revenue and their schools are not based on whether they're poor and rich, and they're able to get high quality education like every other child in this world. You better believe you don't need the cops. And defunding police also is something I've been explaining. I had to explain it to my immigrant parents. And when I explained it, they were like, shit, that makes sense. I said to my father, I said, Mental health professionals go to university. They go to training for 6 to 7 years and to get their certification and degrees to be mental health professionals. How in the hell do you expect a police officer, like, for example, the New York Police Department, who goes to 6 months of training in the academy, and tell me that they are equipped to deal with mental health illnesses or someone who's having a mental health breakdown? Or explain to me why you want your child to go to a school where you have armed police officers walking around. Cops should not be in schools and should not be called for school discipline. Kids need restorative justice and they need services. Cops are not equipped to deal with the homeless. Why would we call 911 because a homeless man is sleeping on the street and doesn't have a house? Explain to me how that makes any type of sense. So what we're saying is cops are not educators. They're not social workers. They're not mental health providers. They're not case managers to help the homeless. So why do you call them in those situations? Oftentimes, the many murders that we have seen over the last few years was over things that did not require police. And lastly, what I'll say is about the Rayshard Brooks case. Nothing that happened on that night in Atlanta justified a 911 call. A guy is drunk in his car. Knock on the window. And that is why my book is called We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. This is about bystander intervention. This is about being a community, part of a community. It's about when we say Assata Shakur's chant, we must love and protect one another. This is not just words, folks. This is actual action. Requires you to be a person who contributes and participates. If you were a person in that Wendy's lot, if you were a worker at Wendy's, you knock on the man's window and you say, hey, how can we help you? Are you okay? You doing all right, brother? You don't seem like you're all right. You know what? Where you live? You good? Can I call somebody? Can I call your wife? Do you got a brother or something that I could call? You got a friend to call? This could have all been addressed simply. So the fact that Rayshard Brooks is dead is not just simply because of the lack of accountability and because of brutal police departments. It's a lack of community. That there should have never been a reason why the cops were called, because the cops didn't know anything about Rayshard Brooks. They got the call to come and address him. So why when we see people who are homeless in our community, why don't we show up to figure out what does that homeless person need? What did Rayshard Brooks need so he could go home safely to his family? So I'm calling on us not to hold and put every ill in our society at the feet of police departments. They are one problem, but we are the other problem. And like Tamika said, what are the community alternatives to policing? And those alternatives are us. The question is, are we up to the challenge?
That whole idea of what can we do for our communities came up in my head around the looting piece. Because people were like, yo, they burning down stuff in their own communities. You know, they're vandalizing the Target. And what about the people who live around there? I'm like, yo, this is the moment we said we wanted. So then open up the church basement, cook some meals. Let's start putting care packages together. Celebrities that have resources, send the wipes, the baby Pampers, the food. Let's make packages and start giving it out to our community. We said we wanted to be a community. We want to build the beloved community. If that's what we want to do, this is the moment. And I'm not suggesting that people should vandalize. I'm not saying that people should do any of that. But I'm just saying that if we get to a point where there's actual famine, because the resistance and the rebellion is so strong, then what are we prepared to do as a community to take care of our own? We have the resources. We can actually do it. You know, so I agree with you 1,000%, Linda, that the problem is not just the outside forces. The issue is also all of us, you, us, me, you, us, that talk a lot of rhetoric. We all talking about how we gonna be a community, we can take care of ourselves, we gonna do all of this and that, and then they burn down a local Target, and we go, well, what are people gonna eat? Oh my God, what gonna eat? You cook the food in the kitchen and let's take care of our family.
You're right. Listen, y'all, I just want y'all to know that it all makes so much sense. You know, people say make it make sense. You don't got to make this make sense. This is in our DNA to take care of one another, but we bought into this capitalistic, individualistic, kind of dog-eat-dog empire culture that robs us of our own humanity. And I just want to appreciate both of you for putting all this on the table. We got questions.
Wait,
so we want to give y'all some.
Let me just say, and the protesters got it, because I'm not, again, And by the way, Target said that they were going to bring resources to the demonstrators. So let me just put that out front now before I get to talking.
That's called a preemptive. That's called a preemptive effort.
They agree with me. But what I was thinking, what I saw, and Linda can tell you, they didn't just go into Target and loot and just, hold all the resources. They bought the milk out to deal with the tear gas. They bought the granola bars out. There was food. There was paper towel. There was toilet tissue. There were baby wipes. There was services on the street for the protest. So other people get the idea of how we take care of ourselves and the community. And guess what? Some people will say, well, if you weren't out there protesting, then, you wouldn't need all of that. Well, how about this? The police is mad at us because George Floyd got killed. That's our brother. Y'all killed him and you show up militarized, mad at us.
That's right.
Instead of you coming to the street and bowing down and saying, we're wrong, you're right, and we're going to fix this.
That's right. That's right. And the posture, right? The posture of how they show up, they don't even appreciate is what exacerbates all of the energy. I mean, Absolutely. If you were in a room, if you were let's say you were just in a church service and you having a high time, whatever, Holy Ghost rolling on the floor, swinging from the chandelier, speaking in tongue and levitating. Let's say you're doing all that in a church service. And all of a sudden, 100 militarized police officers march in your church and just stand along the outskirts of the walls. The whole energy of that Holy Ghost moment is gone just like that. And so it's important.
And grandma might go down in her bag and get something to help to handle you with it too.
That's right. Talk about bringing the heat, right? So it's really important for us. A lot of people who've not been out in protest or whatnot, folks just don't appreciate how the energy is very easy to shift if you have a certain kind of energy injected into it. And that's why I do believe we have provocateurs and we have all these other folks out there because they are trying to destabilize the energy to discredit the righteous rage, indignation, pain, trauma, and hurt. And so I think we got to keep pushing that the militarization of police officers, not just at protests, but in communities. If it's indeed the case that only 5% of all arrests are for violent crimes, why does every single police officer need to have a gun to show up to do their work? I mean, right. That presence of the gun creates the possibility of an escalation that otherwise would be absent if you just showed up with other tools in your tool belt. And so I just want us to keep driving this point home, particularly because we're here to talk about equipment tonight. And I want to give y'all some rapid fire questions. Now, I need both y'all preaching women, y'all long-winded preaching women to give us some rapid responses to these questions, because people want to hear from you. One of our loved ones, you all know them very well from Ferguson, T-Dub. Y'all know T-Dub. He's here, and he has a question about what do we need to do to eradicate the 1033 programs that provide military grade gear to police departments. This is an old fight. Well, old in the sense of 5 years. Do you have a quick thought about what that role or what that particular ask? How do we get to the root of demilitarizing police departments and the capital that is attached to that kind of equipment?
First, I want to say salute to our comrades in Ferguson, who were uprising before the uprising, and we see you, and we have continued to be inspired by your work. I mean, it's possible, and I know it's a long journey. As Nipsey Hussle said, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and you are all doing the work. For example, today in New York City, we just had a mayor sign a piece of legislation called the Post Act, where it specifically looks at the surveillance equipment of the New York Police Department, who, as you know, has more surveillance equipment than the actual entire Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Wow.
And the NYPD is going out of their mind that we will be actually cataloging the type of surveillance equipment used by the New York Police Department. There is a federal piece of legislation that is very important. Congressman Hanks has put it on the table before. Everybody everybody was ignoring him. Everybody was like, this Black Panther, crazy Southern, Black guy must be out of his mind. And now we're actually talking about his legislation. He has a legislation called the Stop Militarization of Law Enforcement. It's very simple. It's exactly what that title says. And it says that the Stop Militarization of Law Enforcement says that from federal funding, because police departments receive federal funding, and a lot of their militarized equipment comes through the federal funding that they receive from the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. And so that piece of legislation limits and it requires for local police departments to have to do these very rigorous applications. Like, you can't just get a tank. You can't just get tear gas. You have to be able to justify why you would even need that type of equipment. And we know for a fact that there really is no justification for it. So we believe the support of that bill, Stop Militarization of the Police, calling on Nancy Pelosi to, not just piecemeal and give us a little something to make us feel better, that she really be comprehensive in the type of leadership that we need her to have on this issue. Of course, it can happen on a local level, but we can also do it on a federal level.
What about if you could say maybe a quick moment about the Briannas Law, right? To trying to get rid of these kind of no-knock warrants, and how do people do it in a way that's localized? So I think where a lot of people are getting some questions in the chat, people are trying to figure out, well, how do I get that done? How do I get engaged to get some of these tactics and strategies out? You all have been at the head of Briannas Law along with others to make that happen. What are the steps that y'all would offer people around how to engage? We got 17,000 police departments across the country. How would you invite them to start engaging around it?
Well, and I'll go really, really quick, and then Linda, you can take it. I think that what happened with Brianna's Law is a clear example of how people from so many different walks of life came together to push. So you had influencers who used their voices to put out a campaign. Many of you probably saw that Alicia Keys and Tracee Ellis Ross and Cardi B and Queen Latifah, MC Lyte, so many women put out a campaign saying, hey, let's call the local city council folks there and tell them that they need to vote to ban no-knock warrants and to vote for Brianna's Law. So that's just one element. That by itself doesn't work. You also have the local grassroots people who are also pushing the city council members. And what we were telling folks, and we've specifically said in our campaign, it's not just having any old body calling from across the country to the city council members. Yeah, that matters. But it matters even more when you call your city council person and say, I live on block so-and-so, and I want you to vote this way for this particular legislation. People don't understand, and they don't understand the value of you pushing your local person and letting them know where you live, who you are, when you donated, and how you intend to use your votes, resources, and otherwise to help put their butts out of office if they don't, if they are not in line with the movement goals. So that was also happening. Then you had protests on the ground. People who were out there, like, don't go home, folks. People who are listening in, right. Whether it's a kids march, whether it is the elders getting out there, don't go home. Continue to organize grassroots efforts, because they are in fact hearing us. They're hearing the phone calls. They're hearing the local work. So I think that's one thing, because all politics are local. But what we're seeing is that because of the models that are being created in places like Louisville, it's beginning to spread rapid fire across the country. So if we know of other cities where no-knock warrants are still a thing, unfortunately, yes, we want to be able to push it from a federal level, and we see that is happening. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were wearing their kente cloth the other day, kneeling and whatever. I didn't need the kente cloth, but if that's what it takes, if the kente cloth helps to do something to your heart, mind, and soul, then
that kente cloth better have some vibranium in it.
It better have some. So, but we see them. You told me not to be long-winded, but we see them. They're trying to push it from a national level, and that's important. But I think in these little cities and states, if we can get no-knock warrants banned there, it'll catch fire and it'll be across the country. Brothers have been calling. We need the brothers to be there for Breonna Taylor. The streets have been burning up for all the brothers. It would be a shame to allow this moment to happen when we had the opportunity. Listen, the officer, like I said, who lied on that no-knock warrant, he was put on administrative leave. That gives you a little bit of an idea that they're saying we got to do something, but power concedes nothing without a demand.
Yeah. Say a quick word about the kind of local organizing that's required for that, Linda. I got another question here about how some folks actually organized in their city, and they had 500 people show up, call, etc., to defund the police. And the mayor told them no matter how many people asked for it, he would not do it. He turns out in January 1st, 2023. What do they do when they do all the organizing and it don't happen the first time? What would you say to some of these new folk who are starting to discover that one action ain't gonna change the world? You just give a little game on how many times you gotta do it.
Ask the Black and brown people. It never happens for us the first time. Let me tell you, it may not even happen the second or the third or the 18th time. But what I will say is you made a great point, like that the power is still in our hands, even when we lose the first time and the second time. On Brianna's Law, the bottom line is, yes, we created national attention. Yes, we worked with national organizers and influencers to create attention. The bottom line, the people they're going to listen to are the Louisville folks, and the Louisville folks stood up. The Louisville folks called their members of the city council. It was a unanimous vote for Brianna's Law. And for folks that want to do this in their city, it's very simple. The legislation's already written. Just go pull out Louisville, bring it to your city if you already have a no-knock warrant policy that is in place. This is the moment for it. As they say, ride the wave. And this is the wave to be riding right now. And to your point, if the elected officials, and this is what I tell people all the time, this is how, for me, I don't pander to any elected officials. The elected officials pander to us, and I'll tell you why. Because we know they work for us. And when I go talk to an elected official, I don't ask any elected official to do any favors for you. I never picked up the phone and said, do me a favor. I call and say, you know what the right thing to do is? Do the right thing, or you're going to see the consequences of what it is we will do if you do not do the right thing. That's my conversation. It's very simple. It's 15 seconds. If your mayor tells you, I don't care if you do 1,000 gazillion calls and I'm not going to do this, that's why you got to register to vote. And that's why you got to go to the polling booth when the day comes. And stop paying so much attention every 4 years to this national election and start telling me who the president is and who's not going to be the president. Bottom line is politics is local. Who's your district attorney? Who's your mayor? Who's your county attorney? Who's your state attorney general? Those are the races that matter in our local communities. By the time the president figures out where the bathroom is in the White House, that trickle down thing, it just doesn't get to us in time. But what will get to us is what our actions of our mayors are, our actions of our governors and our state legislators. So in this next upcoming election, there's an election every year. Tell your mayor, whoever he is, I'm ready to go. Find us a progressive, find us a young person of color, find us someone passionate. Let's put them on the map. Let's make sure they have the resources, and let's, go up against the people. And when people say to us, Ben, oh, voting, everybody keeps telling us the voting thing, go and vote. And I always say to people, listen, if voting didn't work, if it was not actually powerful, the Republicans would be passing laws everywhere trying to take our right to vote away from us. There is power in something that someone wants to take from you. So let's use that power on a local level.
It looks like we probably only have probably about 5 to 6 more minutes, maybe a little bit more before we have to say goodbye to y'all. We could sit on this call for 2 to 3 hours and just have y'all just riff and raff and keep hitting it. I wonder if there would be a final word that y'all would say to people. Part of these town halls, we've got thousands of people now that have been coming into these town halls who are brand new to the movement. Y'all saw that during the women's movement, the Women's March, where you got people coming in who are new. They're trying to figure out how to participate. And not just all white folks. We got Black folks that are coming in, have been watching what's been happening to our people, but they're just waking up and trying to figure out how to engage. What might be a couple last words that both of y'all might give people who feel like, I'm just starting up, and they like, I can't turn up like Tamika and Linda. I can't turn up like the McBride boys. Well, like Mike, I still say Mike's a little bit crazy than I am. I turn up McBride. Videos. But for people that would say, I'm not so radical, how do I engage? What's the invitation y'all would give them? Particularly, like, we need to demilitarize these police. We need to stop the brutality that is happening to our people while we try to transform and create a new system. But what is your last word, challenge, encouragement you would put to people who are just starting this movement?
So I'm going to let Linda preach because that's what she does. And I'm just going to say that all of us enter at different points, different places. None of us are going to be on the same level. And some people, it's funding, right? Some people feel like I can't hit the streets for whatever reason. I'm unable. We're in the COVID-19 time when folks are, dealing with pre-existing health conditions, elderly parents, loved ones that they just feel like they can't hit the street. They can't be out there, but they can give $5, $10 to a local grassroots organization. Stop giving your money to the Red Crosses of the world, knowing that they already have resources. And meanwhile, little boots on the ground, organizations that are actually out there all night long, providing protection and doing real serious work are underfunded. They need support. And so I would say, find out who's in your local community and figure out how you can help them. You might be someone that says, yo, I'm an accountant and I don't really know how to do work in the movement. Well, guess what? Many of our organizations need an accountant to come in and help so we can get the donations, get the money to make the organization strong, to be able to do the work. So there's some way that every single person can participate. But what I will say is that doing nothing is not okay. That's not acceptable. You have to find your entry point, your way that you can get involved, because I don't want to do it either. I want to take care of my mom. I want to talk to my mom. But instead, I know how important this conversation is where we're educating people about how they can get in. And so I still have to get on a plane, fly to another place, be at a rally, organize. And if you can't say, well, I'm going to give a little bit of time to support in some way. I'm a graphic designer. I can make flyers. I'm a lawyer. I can help with some legal work. You can't do that. Then you're just sorry. And you're looking for a way to stay at home and protect yourself. But then you want to ride the coattails of freedom. It doesn't work like that. We can't work with your assistant to help you get freedom. It's not going to be your agent that helps you get it. It's not going to be your manager. It's going to be you, your cell phone, your computer, your boots on the ground. And that's just a fact.
It's just a fact. And Linda, as you speak for your final closing words, I want you to talk to folks who are having tough conversations with their families because their families are anti-Black. Their families are anti the movement. They're anti-activism, whatever. What would you say to them? Because I do have folks in my congregation and in our spaces. They're calling because, we be preaching on them and telling them, you got to go come get your kids because your kids out here, tearing up stuff, right? Come get your kids talking to white folks for the anarchists. But they're having these conversations and they're devastated that they're white, their families that are white or that are Latino or that even conservative Black folks or just self-righteous Black folks that don't think this stuff, they're devastated. Your bystander book, you have a quick word to say to encourage them as they're trying to pull some of their family members into an ally or co-conspirator position.
I say to people all the time that it doesn't really require much courage to come to the front lines and stand for the sanctity of Black life. That is, in fact, the right thing to do. But what requires more courage than that is going back deep into our families and eradicating the anti-Black, not just white folks, but folk, Latinos, Middle Eastern folks, Arab Americans, South Asian. I mean, this is an epidemic, anti-Black racism, worldwide epidemic. And so while Black people have been risking their lives for all of us for centuries, I'm asking you to risk your relationships. Say, grandmother, I'm not coming over your house for Thanksgiving if you don't start getting yourself together. I'm not going to go to the next barbecue on Labor Day with my racist uncle, if my racist uncle doesn't get together. Your family has to understand that you are serious, that you are not going to condone, nor be around, nor reinforce or reaffirm with your presence those in your families who cannot see something as simple as the sanctity of Black life. And so that's what I do. And I do that and I hold my own people responsible. I'm working on a national campaign right now with Arab Americans, specifically around the relationship between Black people and Black communities and Arab and South Asian store owners and bodega owners and corner store owners. Being able to go to folks in my own community as a daughter of a bodega owner in New York City to say, listen, this community we paid our mortgage because of Black people. You sent your children to school because of Black people. These people are not just your, transactional. These are people who helped me be who I am today. So what is your contribution as a business owner in the communities, regardless of what race you are? And so right now is the moment to ride this momentum. It's in the news. It's in every newspaper. It's all, and to say, not just for the Black kids in the front line saying enough is enough, we're not going to take it. For us to say enough is enough. We are not going to be part of a generation that somehow continues anti-Black racism and passes it on to another generation. And that's going to require that we might lose some friends, maybe a family member or two, but that's worth it because other people, Mike and Ben, are not just losing their family member or losing their boyfriend or their husband. They're losing their life. And I think it's worth it in this moment.
Listen, we thank y'all. Y'all have brought some fire to this thing. People are lighting up all over the internet. My phone is about to burn up because folks are texting, trying to figure out how can they get more of this conversation. We want everybody to follow them on every social media channel. They own Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. People can go to, what's the website for Until Freedom?
Untilfreedom.com.
Thank you, Tamika. Thank you, Linda.
Love you.
Love y'all so much.
Well, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to hang out with Tamika and Linda. Obviously, their leadership, their voices, their analysis is so important for this moment. And it does remind us that we have made some progress if we look back over this last year. But we still, have a ways to go.
Yeah, Pastor Mike, I definitely agree. I think we've made a lot of progress over the last year. One of the initial wins being Briannas Law, which banned no-knock warrants in Louisville. That was passed in June of last year. And I know that there is similar legislation in the works across the country, like in Virginia, they just passed it statewide.
Yeah, the idea that we are continuing to experience the ramifications of police officers' conduct in moments of their highest expression of anger, fear, and pain reminds us that accountability has to be a companion to the shifts that we see in laws and in policies. Just this week, we are enduring, hopefully, the conclusion of the George Floyd case that is, happening nationwide, where Officer Chauvin is standing trial and putting up a defense that is literally criminalizing George Floyd as a way to excuse his actions. We've also continued to see in real time police officers abusing their authority and using lethal force as they respond to everyday traffic stops. I think Daunte Wright is an example of that.
I agree. Literally, what is it? Just 10 miles away from Minneapolis, Daunte Wright was stopped for, of all things, an air freshener and hanging on his rearview mirror. And that one encounter with the police led to, him not being able to go home to his family and to his child, and more of a militarized response to those protests than what they did, what them people did on January 6th at the Capitol, basically.
Yeah, the stark contrast is too glaring for us to omit and to turn away from. And this is indeed, I think, the challenge we have. Like, what is our response in the midst of this continued onslaught of state-sanctioned violence that appears to only touch the lives of Black and brown folks? And it's indiscriminate, and it continues to impact younger people. Our children and our kids. Adam Toledo, Latino young boy, 13 years old, killed by police in Chicago. And what continues to make it so terrible is the spin that elected officials put on these tragedies so as to lessen the rage, the righteous rage and indignation of all of us who believe that children nor adults should be killed by law enforcement or by the state without consequence. The list goes on and on and on. And at some point, we have to begin to really shift the way in which we are thinking of our collective response.
I agree. I think we should be looking at gun violence as a public health crisis in America. And that's gun violence in the community perspective. And also, I think personally, gun violence as it comes from law enforcement, right? So the discussion around defunding the police, abolishing the police, reimagining, all these different words that people want to use. I think that those are critical conversations because, as the CDC just said, racism is a public health crisis, and all of those things, just the way that law enforcement is built in America, impacts people of color disproportionately.
And we got to keep reminding ourselves there are proven strategies that can allow us to lessen the impact and the persistence of this state and interpersonal violence. And these proven strategies are a part of a government response that Joe Biden and the administration have committed to doing in light of a lot of expressed advocacy from our Fund Peace Coalition, a national network of Black and Brown gun violence practitioners who have for some years been advocating for a significant investment of federal dollars into the strategies that we know actually keep our community safe. And we're super excited to see that President Biden and his administration have made a $5 billion commitment to fund community violence initiatives in the American Jobs Plan. And it has indeed been a long time coming.
Amen. And what would you say are some of the strategies, Pastor Mike, that work?
Well, we know that the number of individuals who are often driving the large percentage of gun-related shootings and homicides in our communities, that number of folks is relatively small. Sometimes it's less than half of 1%. Most time it's easily less than 1% of the city's total population. And so the strategies that we know work include creating a comprehensive series of wraparound services that touch these young men at the point of their kind of deepest pain and conflict, and interrupts the violence using public health strategies, mental health supports, strategies that do not require the presence of violence or force by the police, strategies that meet these families and young people at the hospitals in the immediate aftermath of them experiencing a gun injury, to talk to family members and ensure that retaliatory responses are steered away from folks and they're actually steered towards the kinds of healing services and peacemaking strategies that we know work. Often hiring individuals who come from the communities and who have rehabilitated themselves or overcome the kind of street culture of urban life, and now they are actually seeing themselves as a part of a solution. And we hire them as violence interrupters and outreach workers, and let them have the first crack or the second crack or even the third crack at trying to negotiate peaceful resolutions to conflict. And all of this, we think, needs to be housed in offices or departments of violence prevention at the local level, so people can actually have a centralized place where professional development, perpetual investments, and a pipeline of workers, if you will, can have a permanent home that does not go away at the whims of the political leaders who take over the executive leadership or city and states. And so Live Free's menu of strategies that we've been advocating, it looks like we're finally going to get some federal commitment of dollars over the next 8 years, and it's very, very exciting.
So do you think that our current policing system, is there any hope for it, or does it need to, what do you think needs to happen? Because there's all these words we mentioned earlier: defund, abolish, reform, reimagine. What do you think needs to happen with law enforcement in America today?
Well, we believe that the law enforcement apparatus has to really be dismantled and reconstructed with the kind of current sensibilities and values of justice, inclusion, and really, trauma at the core of how we respond to people's worst conditions. I do believe that the systems of policing we have today are a vestige of slavery and anti-blackness, and so it's very hard to reform something that at its root, has a whole group of people, kind of seen as the problem and not as a potential solution.
I agree. I was speaking with the founder of an organization based in Los Angeles, and what he does is basically help young people who found themselves in the juvenile detention system as, teenagers. And when they come out, like similar to what Live Free does, giving them the opportunity to complete school, giving them a very structured curriculum and other extracurricular activities so that they don't necessarily fall back into the whims of, the system. And something that he was saying, it blew my mind, because I asked him, why does the city of Los Angeles have the highest youth incarceration rate in the world? That was a statistic that he gave. And he said that it was like that because, sending people back to jail, that makes money for the prison industrial industry, and they got to pay people's pensions. They got to pay these police officers' pensions, these prison guards' pensions, and all these other. They have to basically these people being able to live their life is based on our oppression, is based on our people being locked up, and it really just blew my mind. So I agree that I don't think a system that's based on the degradation and the oppression of a group of people can really survive long term and be able to sell a whole country on this is the way that it should be, when it's very clearly the opposite.
Yeah, the profit motive in both the prison industrial complex and the law enforcement system is a very hard nut to crack when you're trying to dissuade the profiteering off of our bodies or off of our kind of worst conditions. And so we do have quite a task to make sure that the kind of investments that are being made on the other side of the ledger related to healing, opportunity, housing, peacemaking, those investments of our tax base has to become a real critical part of the way forward. And I hope that our Fund Peace campaign, the Fund Peace Now, you can go to the website fundpeacenow.org and join and learn more about it. Bringing that kind of thinking to our local, state, and federal policymaking, I think, will be an important way forward.
And Pastor Mike, how would you respond to efforts that try to undermine the work of Black and Brown organizations doing the important work in our communities?
Well, I think it's important to remind ourselves continuously that the discrediting of Black and Brown leadership organizations is a hallmark of white supremacy. Is a targeted strategy to shine light and scrutiny on our efforts to break free from white supremacist sensibilities. That is so hypocritical, because law enforcement agencies, if judged by the same standards, would not even exist today, because their failures and their scandals are too many to count. It does not free us, though, from ensuring our own internal accountability to values and to principles that make sure that everything we do is accountable to the people we do it with and on whose behalf. We also must, build into our work this really important kind of discipline around failure as a part of succeeding. And I've been learning a little bit more about Dr. Leah Wright Rigour's work, who talks about a safe to fail framework that we build into our movements, that, sometimes we don't afford people the chance to fail as a way to learn how to lead and experience success along the way, that we create environments where marginalized groups or historically disadvantaged populations have to be successful the first time out the gate, or our work is discredited. And so a safe to fail framework, we're going to be exploring that a little bit more as we build this work out, because as the $5 billion and the other federal investments hit our communities, we know this is an emerging market now, an emerging sector of work. And so we don't want to put unnecessary pressure on us to have to get it right the first time in order for it to be considered valuable and valid.
That's so true. So can you think of like an inspiring example where failure actually did help in the work that you and Live Free are doing?
Oh, well, in many of the cities across the country, the process of scaling up these gun violence prevention strategies were wrought with missteps and failures. Just taking Oakland as an example, we had to implement the strategy at least 2 times to get it right. And along the way, we've had to make lots of changes to ensure that we were hitting the kind of targets that we wanted. And so we lost some organizing fights. We heard many more no's than we heard yes. As a matter of fact, I can recall during the whole Obama administration, we were consistently seeking more federal funding for these strategies. We were seeking more federal support politically for the strategies that we know reduce gun violence without sending more of our loved ones to jail. And we consistently heard no by pretty much every member of the Obama administration who had the jurisdiction to make it happen. But our no's did not cause us to turn away. Those no's gave us more experience and opportunities to turn the unconvinced into yeses. And that is, I think, one of the greatest victories that this most recent $5 billion investment of community violence initiatives has brought to us. Then Vice President Joe Biden was not an advocate for this, but now President Joe Biden is a champion for this. It's taken us about 10 years to get to this place, but it's a great example of how our failures led to our successes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pastor Mike, for sharing your experiences. A lot of people don't really want to share the failures, right? In today's society, they always want to show the wins. But a lot of times when we do share our failures with others, we're obviously teaching them along the way that, persistence and having the continual will to learn is key. It's key to seeing the improvements that we want to make.
Yeah, it is. And I do hope that people take these lessons to heart and keep pushing as we continue to have as the North Star justice and inclusion for all the people.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And since this is a For the People podcast, Pastor Mike, I think you have something that you could share with the people that can kind of be a call to action for us to all do and take part in as we continue to do this important work. Can you tell us a little bit about the Fund Peace Initiative and how people can support it?
So Fund Peace, as I stated, was a wonderful and important collaboration of Black and Brown gun violence prevention advocates, organizers, frontline workers, and experts, practitioners who really built an important coalition to push the Biden administration to invest dollars in community violence initiatives, urban gun violence prevention programs. It's not a gun control initiative per se. So all of you who are concerned about the kind of blind spots in the gun control movement, we're really taking seriously this notion that together we can unlock the federal tax base of the government to fund peace in our communities. You can go to fundpeacenow.com and sign the petitions that are there. Download the toolkit. There's a number of assets that you can use to help further this message. We're asking folks to buy a T-shirt that has Fund Peace on it to help us continue to, have a grassroots revenue stream to keep the organizing going. Call your mayor, call your county administrator, call your governor, call your congressional representatives, and make sure they know that the use of our tax base to fund peace without growing the police budgets is a righteous way to get us to the North Star we all care about.
Yes, I'm going right now. And I also want to make sure that we also remind people that when they're posting on social media, if there's anything related to this, or if they just want to share more about the movement themselves, to use the hashtag Fund Peace in their social media posts.
Yes. Hashtag Fund Peace for the people.
For the people.
So as you can see, for the last year, we've definitely made some improvements. We obviously still have such a long ways to go. And our organizing work, our resistance work cannot cease. We cannot allow the distractions, the nihilism, the continued onslaught of these incidences to make us lose heart. So I encourage everyone, keep listening, stay diligent, stay active. Remind yourself that all the work we are doing is indeed improving the conditions for our families, our loved ones. It's improving the conditions indeed for the people.
Amen, Pastor Mike. And that concludes this episode of For the People.